Hello, everyone. I just wanted to make a quick video today for our critical thinking class to go over the assignment for the week as well as the discussion that we are having. So I'm going to share my screen with you, show you a short presentation, kind of lecture over it a little bit, and then talk about the assignment that we have. So let me see here. So this is the course Blackboard that we should be looking at now. So our work for the week is the language discussion, which if you haven't taken a look at it yet, you need to read it's about a short New York Times article that you should read over. It's about a man who used a word in the correct dictionary definition way, but it's a word that does not sound appropriate at all. And as a result, a lot of controversy developed. And so there's some interesting things to think about there in terms of the power of language. And so I want to take a quick look at critical thinking and language with this presentation, and I will post a link to this presentation as well as upload this video, or post a link to this video as well. So basically, we all use language, obviously. What this week's discussion has to do more specifically is with nonverbal language. The idea, or I'm sorry, what this week's assignment has to do with is nonverbal language, the idea that language is more than just the words we speak, they're the words that we don't speak. There are mannerisms, our tones, our inflections, our facial expressions, our twitches, our eye contact or lack thereof, our posture, our clothing, our hygiene. All of these things are communicating information all the time, which leads to this question, or I get this comment from students all the time, especially in high school. They'll say, like, I don't have control over those things, or what those things are saying all the time, so is that really fair? And it's a good question. We don't really have control over our nonverbal body language things all the time. Some people react to things or have weird facial expressions that just, communicate information that they didn't actually want to communicate. You can get as dressed up and look as nice as you want to before a job interview, and the wind can still mess with your hair or something stupid. I don't know. Just we don't always have control over that. And should we be able to, or should we really be judged by that? And the best answer that I found really is just fair or not. It's just kind of how things go. And the more that you kind of are aware of nonverbal language, the more you can utilize it. You can consider it as part of your ability to persuade, to be rhetorically persuasive. So we're going to talk a little bit about the complexities of language in order to kind of better understand how language functions. So language linguistically, if we think about the study of language, what language is a system of symbols that have meaning attached to them. There's two sides to this. There's the signifiers and the signified. So we have the signifier, the word bicycle, for example, conjures in your mind the image of a bicycle. It is the bicycle itself, the actual thing is signified by the word bicycle and this combination of letters and sounds. Same thing with car. I say the word car, you think of a car. I say the word tree, you think of a tree. The problem, I should say, is that words are just the series of letters and sounds, right? Nothing about the word tree makes a tree. Nothing about the word car makes a car, except for the fact that in our linguistic history, we people sort of agreed on that throughout time and culture and history. And that can lead to some confusions because language becomes tremendously arbitrary. If words only mean something because we give them that meaning, then words can also mean multiple things, and words can change and lose their meaning in time, or mean something entirely different in one group versus another group. So this all leads to confusion, and language is confusion. So for example, if I say the word tree like we did earlier, I say the word signifier tree, you think of a tree, right? But that depends on where you grew up in the environment. So I think of trees like this because I grew up in the Midwest. someone in a very different place, when I say tree, might think of this. Um, so you can begin to see how this system of signifiers and signifieds leads to confusion. So essentially the idea is that language is arbitrary, becomes fluid, it is not precise, it is not exact. There is differences between connotation and denotation. There's differences, between the dictionary definition of a word and the cultural definition of a word. And that can lead to all sorts of confusions. I'll skip through this Plato stuff if you're interested in it. Plato was a crazy dude. And was interested in what things really were and kind of was wrestling with this problem of signs and signifiers like 2,500 years ago before anybody knew anything. So then the questions kind of pops up, or another question that pops up with this discussion or just this concept of language being arbitrary is, how do we ever understand one another? Some philosophers suggest we never really do, at least not completely, that no matter how hard we try, no matter how much we communicate, I can never know your experience and you can never know mine. So then all we can really do is strive to send the clearest transmission and hope that it is received in the context and meaning we sent it. The answer to this question, by the way, the idea that we never really do, is maybe why we're, as a species, so caught up with art and media and trying to communicate, because we're aware that we're not that great at it. So that leads us to this discussion. We can think of language as this kind of space where you put something out there and it sort of exists in the culture and space that you put it out there and then has to be digested by the listener, reader, viewer, etc. So it exists for however long in the sort of void space, and then all of that extra stuff gets pulled into it, right? So what our discussion is about is that David Howard said this phrase, "I will have to be niggardly with this fund because it's not going to be a lot of money." The word niggardly means, it's an adjective, reluctant to give or spend, stingy, meanly or ungenerously small or scantily. This word, as awful as it sounds, and I want to make it very, very clear, this is the word I'm saying, not its other word. But this word, as terrible as it sounds, has nothing to do with that other word at all. They're not linguistically linked. They don't have a linguistic history together. There's no correlation between the racial slur and this word, other than that they sound the same. So if you say that word, as Mr. Howard did, the in-between static, our culture and history of slavery and racism in North America, suddenly a word that he meant cheap, he meant careful, he meant cautious, frugal, etc., changes the message that he receives quite a lot, or the message that was received. So think about those things as we look through this discussion. How does language work? To what extent is the responsibility of meaning on the receiver versus the one speaking? How do we analyze audiences? How do we communicate effectively if communication isn't fully possible? Next thing I want to look at real quick is the nonverbal language assignment. So let me just go into the actual assignment prompt real quick and kind of go over it with you guys. Just because there are a lot of little things to this prompt that kind of trip students up. So first thing is, the first thing that students get messed up on with this assignment, and if you've started it and you've gone down this path, please don't feel bad. It happens to most students. All this Scott Peterson stuff is context. You are not being asked to write about Scott Peterson. You're not being asked to write about his trial. It's just context. If you want to integrate it a little bit, go for it. But that's not your goal. Your goal is this stuff. First and foremost, answering this question. Should jurors be allowed to see a defendant during a trial, or should a law be set in place that sets the defendant out of the jury's view so as not to influence their decision? So that's your first point. If, like I said before, feel free to integrate the Scott Peterson stuff as much as you want, as long as you're focusing on the question. For whatever reason, students get real caught up and they give me like a 2-page Wikipedia summary of the Scott Peterson trial, and then they don't actually answer any of the questions. And if you'll notice, I said questions because the actual prompt then goes on. So if this is your main question, your paper should include the following. Thoughts on the language games played in a courtroom. So basically what I'm looking for, ideally, is at least like a short few sentences or a paragraph devoted to each of these questions. Your paper should include thoughts on the language games played in a courtroom. So what kind of language games can occur in the courtroom? Manipulative elements of verbal and nonverbal language games. So how could like lawyers or defense attorneys, how could defendants even manipulate their language? And then the goals of the defense versus the prosecution, and then the use of rhetorical tools like hyperbole, euphemisms, euphemisms, sarcasm, emotive language, all of those. So the reason I'm highlighting this is I really want you to spend a little time breaking down each of these questions. So again, don't get super caught up on this. Do make sure you answer the main question, and definitely make sure you go through and give at least a little bit of attention to each of these sub-questions. That's it. I hope you guys have a good week. If you have more questions about this, let me know. Those of you who got your assignment in on time for the preview, I will get those back to you by like tomorrow afternoon, I think. That's it. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, have a great week.